I trusted my son with my life. Every night, he handed me 2 small pills and told me they would help my memory. I never questioned him until the day I pretended to swallow them and heard the truth through a half-closed door. In that moment, everything I believed about family, trust, and love shattered. Because the person I raised, the one I thought would protect me, was quietly building a case to take everything I owned and erase me from my own life. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. My name is Margaret Hayes, and I am 68 years old. For most of my life, I was a high school history teacher, the kind who believed that understanding the past made it easier to navigate the future. I never imagined I would one day become the subject of a story I could not have predicted. I live in Charleston, South Carolina, in a house that has stood longer than many of the memories it holds. My husband and I bought it more than 40 years ago, when the paint was peeling and the porch sagged slightly under its own weight. We spent years restoring it piece by piece, sanding the floors ourselves, repainting the shutters a soft coastal blue, and planting jasmine along the fence line. This house was never just a place to live. It was where we built our life. After my husband passed away 3 years ago, the house became quieter, but not empty. I learned how to exist within that quiet. Mornings began with coffee on the front porch, watching the light stretch slowly across the street. I took walks through the neighborhood, greeting familiar faces, feeling the steady rhythm of a place that had not changed as quickly as the rest of the world. I managed my finances, cooked my meals, and kept my routines intact. I was alone, but I was not lost. My son, Daniel Hayes, lived a very different life. He was a financial lawyer, sharp and driven, always moving forward. He called often, usually in between meetings, his voice carrying the pace of a world that rarely slowed down. He sounded concerned when he spoke about me living alone, though I never quite felt fragile enough to need that concern. Daniel's wife, Olivia, was different. She worked in investment consulting and carried herself with a kind of precision that made everything seem deliberate. Her words were measured, her appearance always immaculate, and her presence in the room never accidental. She was polite to me, always respectful, but there was a distance I could not quite name. It was Daniel who first suggested they move in. He framed it as something practical, something temporary. He talked about safety, about how things could change quickly at my age, about how he would feel better knowing someone was there if anything happened. He spoke carefully, not as a demand, but as a concern. At first, I resisted. I had spent years maintaining my independence, proving to myself that I could still manage my life without relying on anyone else. The idea of giving that up, even partially, felt like losing something I was not ready to let go of. But loneliness has a quiet way of influencing decisions. It does not demand attention. It simply lingers, shaping your thoughts over time. I found myself imagining the house with voices again, with footsteps in the hallway, with someone to share dinner with at the end of the day. So I agreed. When Daniel and Olivia moved in, the house changed almost immediately. There was movement again, the sound of doors opening and closing, conversations drifting from one room to another. Dinner felt like an event instead of a routine. For a while, it felt like something had been restored. I remember standing in the hallway one evening, listening to them talk in the kitchen and thinking how fortunate I was. Not everyone has family willing to rearrange their lives to be present. Not everyone gets a second chance at that kind of closeness. At the time, I believed I was one of the lucky ones. If you're still watching and this moment made you question how far trust can really go, comment number 1 below to let me know you're with me. Now let's move into what first started to feel wrong. At first, nothing about the change felt alarming. It came quietly, almost gently, the way most things do when they are meant to go unnoticed. Daniel began bringing me 2 small white pills each evening after dinner. He called them vitamins, something to support memory and cognitive health. He said many people my age took them as a precaution. I did not question him. There are certain assumptions you never think to challenge, and trust in your own child is one of them. The routine formed quickly. Around the same time each night, he would appear at my door or in the living room, holding the pills and a glass of water. His tone was always calm, reassuring, almost practiced. I would take them, swallow, and think nothing more of it. Olivia sometimes stood nearby, watching with a polite smile that never quite reached her eyes. At the time, I interpreted it as attentiveness. Within a few weeks, I began to notice small changes in myself. They were subtle at first, easy to dismiss. I felt more tired than usual during the day, the kind of fatigue that seemed to settle into my bones. I would sit down to read and find myself drifting off without meaning to. Once I was awoke by silence. I woke up in my chair with the television still on, unable to remember when I had fallen asleep. Then came the forgetfulness. I misplaced my keys more often than I ever had before. I walked into the kitchen one afternoon and stood there, unable to recall why I had gone in. During dinner one evening, I told a story about a former student, only to realize halfway through that I had already told it the night before. Daniel gently pointed it out, his voice soft, almost comforting. I laughed it off at the time, but something inside me tightened. Olivia began to take a more active interest in these moments. She would ask questions that sounded casual but felt deliberate. She kept a small notebook with her, and I noticed, more than once, that she would jot something down after I hesitated or forgot a detail. She explained that she was only trying to keep track of things, just in case. Her reasoning sounded sensible, yet it left a faint unease lingering beneath the surface. Daniel reinforced the same message again and again. He told me these changes were normal, that aging affected everyone differently, that there was nothing to worry about. His reassurance should have comforted me, but instead it began to shape the way I saw myself. I started to question my own memory before anyone else could. I second-guessed my thoughts, hesitated before speaking, wondered if I had already said something I could not recall. The doubt settled in quietly. One evening, I found myself repeating a question I had asked only minutes earlier. The look Daniel exchanged with Olivia was brief, almost imperceptible, but I saw it. It was not concern. It was confirmation. That moment stayed with me long after dinner ended. That night, as I sat alone in my bedroom, something felt different. It was not a specific thought, but a growing awareness, like a faint signal I could no longer ignore. When Daniel brought the pills, I took them as usual, raised the glass to my lips, and pretended to swallow. Instead, I held them carefully and slipped them into a tissue when he was not looking. For the first time, I did not take what he gave me. I lay in bed with my eyes closed, listening to the quiet of the house. Minutes passed. Then I heard voices from the hallway, low and controlled, Daniel and Olivia. Their tone was not worried, it was measured. "She is almost ready," Olivia said. Daniel's response came without hesitation. "Just a little longer." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that pressed down on my chest. I remained still, barely breathing, as their footsteps moved away. In that moment, something shifted inside me. The confusion I had been feeling no longer seemed like a symptom. It felt like a pattern, and for the first time, I considered a possibility that had never once crossed my mind before. Maybe the problem was not my memory. Maybe the problem was my son. If you're still here, and you've ever ignored a small red flag that later meant everything, comment number 2 below, so I know you feel this. Now let's see how those small doubts began to grow. I did not sleep that night. I lay still in my bed, eyes closed, listening to the quiet hum of the house, as if it might reveal something more if I paid close enough attention. The words I had overheard repeated themselves over and over in my mind, not loud, but persistent. They did not sound like concern. They sounded like progress. After some time, I reached for the tissue I had hidden beneath my pillow. My hands were steady, but there was something unfamiliar in the way I moved, a carefulness that had not been there before. I unfolded the paper slowly and let the 2 white pills fall into my palm. Under the soft glow of the bedside lamp, they looked ordinary, almost harmless. But when I leaned closer, I noticed the faint imprint on their surface, small letters and numbers pressed into the coating. I had taken vitamins before in my life. None of them had ever looked like this. A quiet realization began to take shape. I did not know what these pills were, but I knew I needed to find out. By morning, I had already made my decision. I would not confront Daniel. Not yet. Accusing him without proof would only make me look exactly like what he wanted me to appear to be. Confused, unstable. I needed certainty before anything else. When I entered the kitchen, both Daniel and Olivia were already there. The smell of coffee filled the room, familiar and grounding. Daniel greeted me with the same easy tone he always used, but now I noticed something different. His eyes lingered on me just a moment longer than necessary, as if he were measuring something. He asked if I had taken my vitamins the night before. I paused deliberately, allowing a slight hesitation to settle into my expression. I answered vaguely, as though I was not entirely sure. Olivia watched me closely, her posture still, her attention sharp in a way that felt almost clinical. In that moment, I understood something clearly. They were not simply observing me. They were evaluating me. I finished my coffee slowly, keeping my movements calm, controlled. Inside, however, everything had shifted. I was no longer reacting. I was preparing. As soon as they left the house, I retrieved the pills from my room and placed them carefully into my purse. Stepping outside felt different than it had in weeks. The air was warm, the sunlight steady, but I felt as though I were seeing everything with new clarity. I had not driven myself anywhere in some time. Daniel had gradually taken over errands, small things that once belonged to my routine. Now I understood that change for what it was. The drive to the pharmacy felt longer than it should have. Every passing car, every red light seemed to stretch time. My thoughts moved faster than the road beneath me, connecting moments I had not questioned before. The fatigue, the forgetfulness, the quiet way Olivia wrote things down. When I finally stepped inside the pharmacy, the familiarity of the place steadied me. The pharmacist had known me for years. He greeted me kindly, unaware that the conversation I was about to have would change everything. I placed the pills on the counter between us. He examined them carefully, turning one under the light. His expression shifted almost immediately, the ease in his face replaced by something more serious. He told me these were not vitamins. They were prescription sedatives, the kind often used for patients with severe anxiety or advanced cognitive decline. I felt the words before I fully understood them. He explained the side effects in a calm, measured tone. Drowsiness, memory impairment, cognitive slowing. Each one aligned perfectly with what I had been experiencing. Each one confirmed what I had begun to suspect. I asked him, as evenly as I could, whether someone could take these without realizing what they were. He said yes. Then he asked who had given them to me. For a moment, I hesitated. Saying it aloud made it real in a way that nothing else had. Finally, I answered, "My son." The pharmacist's expression tightened with concern. He told me I should speak to a doctor or a lawyer. His voice was steady, but there was urgency beneath it. I understood why. As I left the pharmacy, the world outside looked exactly the same, but I did not. The confusion that had clouded my thoughts for weeks had been replaced with something sharper, clearer. Daniel believed he was slowly taking control of my mind. What he did not realize was that I had just taken it back. If you're still watching and starting to sense something deeper beneath the surface, comment number 3 below to stay with me. Now, let's uncover the moment everything truly began to shift. When I left the pharmacy that morning, the truth settled into me with a strange kind of calm. It was not the calm of peace, but the calm that comes after something breaks and cannot be repaired. Fear was still there, and anger too, but neither of them controlled me anymore. What I felt instead was clarity. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I understood one thing with absolute certainty. If I confronted Daniel now, I would lose. He had already been building a narrative, one that made me appear unreliable, confused, incapable. Without proof, anything I said would only support his version of events. I could not afford that. So I made a decision that felt unnatural, almost cruel in its own way. I would give him exactly what he expected to see. When I stepped back inside the house, everything looked the same. The furniture, the light coming through the windows, the quiet hum of the air conditioning. But the feeling was different. This was no longer just my home. It was a place where something was being constructed around me, something I had not agreed to. Olivia was in the kitchen when I entered. She greeted me with her usual composure, her voice light, her expression unreadable. I responded slowly, allowing a small hesitation to creep into my words. It felt uncomfortable, pretending to be unsure of myself, but I forced it. Survival, I reminded myself, does not always look dignified. Over the next few hours, I began to observe more carefully than I ever had before. Olivia's attention was constant, though subtle. She watched not just what I said, but how I said it. Daniel, when he returned later, did the same. His questions were simple on the surface, but they carried weight beneath them. He asked about things I should easily remember, then waited just long enough to see if I hesitated. So, I hesitated. I repeated a question once, deliberately, as if I had forgotten asking it earlier. I allowed confusion to flicker across my face at moments where I knew the answer perfectly well. Each time I did, I saw it. That brief exchange between them. A look, a silent confirmation. They believed it. That realization came with a strange mix of relief and disgust. Relief because my strategy was working. Disgust because it meant they were not hoping I would improve. They were waiting for me to decline. That evening, as we sat at the table, I asked Olivia if we had already eaten lunch. The question was intentional, carefully placed. She paused, just for a second before answering. Then I saw her reach for that small notebook later, writing something down with quiet precision. They were documenting me. The weight of that knowledge pressed down on me, but I kept my expression neutral. Every reaction mattered now. Every word could become part of their story. When night came, the routine continued. Daniel knocked gently on my door, just as he had every night before. He stepped inside with the same calm demeanor, holding the pills and a glass of water. There was nothing outwardly suspicious about the moment. and yet everything about it had changed. I took the pills from his hand, placed them in my mouth, and lifted the glass. My movements were steady, practiced. I swallowed carefully, or at least made it appear that way. Daniel watched me for a brief moment longer than necessary, then nodded with quiet satisfaction before leaving the room. I waited until his footsteps faded down the hallway. Then I went to the bathroom, leaned over the sink, and let the pills fall into my hand. I stared at them for a long moment. Small, white, ordinary. The kind of thing you would never question if it came from someone you trusted. I wrapped them in tissue and placed them in the drawer beside my bed. This would be my routine now. Every night I would take them. Every night I would pretend. And every day I would watch. Because while Daniel believed I was becoming weaker, something else was happening entirely. I was learning. If you're still here and can feel the tension building, comment number 4 below to let me know you're locked in. Now, let's step into the moment where everything starts to spiral. By the time that week ended, pretending had become second nature. I no longer hesitated because I felt uncertain. I hesitated because I chose to. Every pause, every repeated question, every misplaced detail was deliberate. And the more I played the part, the more confident Daniel and Olivia seemed to become. That confidence made them careless. I began to notice changes in the rhythm of the house. Conversations that stopped when I entered a room, doors that closed more often than they used to, voices lowered just enough to suggest secrecy, but not enough to eliminate the possibility of being overheard. Daniel spent more time in his office upstairs, often on the phone, speaking in measured tones I could not fully hear. Olivia, meanwhile, was rarely without her laptop. She typed constantly, her attention fixed, her expression focused in a way that no longer felt like ordinary work. It was not just a feeling anymore. Something was moving forward. The opportunity came unexpectedly one morning when both of them left the house earlier than usual. Daniel had a meeting, and Olivia mentioned something about a client presentation. Their departure left the house in complete silence, a silence that felt heavier than it ever had before. I stood in the hallway for several seconds, listening, making sure I was truly alone. My heart beat faster than I expected, not out of fear, but from the weight of the decision in front of me. What I was about to do felt like a violation, but then I remembered the pills, the notebook, the conversations. This was no longer about boundaries. It was about survival. I moved upstairs slowly, careful with each step. Their bedroom door was partially open. Inside, everything was as orderly as I expected. Olivia's belongings were arranged with precision. Daniel's desk sat near the window, papers stacked neatly in organized piles. I started with the desk. The first drawer contained nothing unusual: financial documents, property listings, routine paperwork. But when I opened the second drawer, I saw something that immediately caught my attention. A folder, thicker than the rest, labeled with a single word: property. My hands felt colder as I opened it. The first document inside was a property valuation report. My address was printed clearly across the top. Beneath it, the estimated market value of the house was listed. The number was higher than I expected, far higher than what we had originally paid decades ago. I stared at it for several seconds, trying to process what it meant. Then I saw the next document, a draft listing agreement. It was incomplete, not yet signed, but the details were unmistakable. The description matched my home exactly. The layout, the features, even the language used to present it. This was not a possibility. This was preparation. A slow, heavy realization settled into my chest. They were planning to sell my house. I placed the papers back carefully, exactly as I had found them. My movements were slower now, more controlled, as if any mistake might expose me. But something pulled my attention toward the back of the drawer. A small notebook. Olivia's. I opened it. Each page contained entries, written in neat, precise handwriting, dates, observations, patterns. I read line after line, my chest tightening with each one. Instances where I had repeated a question, moments where I had hesitated, times I had appeared confused. They had recorded everything, not as concern, but as evidence. One entry stood out. It described a moment I remembered clearly, a moment I had intentionally staged just days earlier. Olivia had written it down as proof of cognitive decline. That was when everything became undeniable. This was not about helping me. This was a case being built. I closed the notebook and returned it to its exact position. Then I stepped back from the desk and stood there in the quiet room, letting the full weight of what I had discovered settle into me. If they succeeded, I would lose more than my house. I would lose control of my life. And for the first time since this began, I no longer felt uncertainty. I had proof. After I left their room and closed the drawer exactly as I had found it, I stood in the hallway for a long time without moving. The house felt different now, not unfamiliar, but altered in a way I could not undo. What I had seen upstairs had taken every doubt I still carried and turned it into certainty. For a brief moment, I considered confronting Daniel. I imagined placing the documents in front of him, forcing him to explain, demanding some version of the truth that might make sense of everything. But the thought did not last. It collapsed under the weight of what I already understood. He had been preparing this for months. A single confrontation would not stop him. It would only warn him. And once warned, he would become more careful. That was when I realized something that changed everything. This was not a situation I could argue my way out of. It was something I would have to outmaneuver. I returned downstairs and sat in the living room, letting my breathing slow until my thoughts became clear again. Piece by piece, I began to map what they were doing. The pills created the symptoms. The notebook recorded those symptoms. The doctor would eventually validate them. And from there, the court would make it official. It was a system, carefully constructed, each step supporting the next. If I wanted to stop it, I would need something stronger than their narrative. I would need proof. The idea of handling it alone felt impossible. For the first time since this began, I allowed myself to think beyond the walls of the house. My mind went immediately to my niece, Rachel Bennett. She worked in a legal office and had always been perceptive, someone who noticed details others ignored. More importantly, she understood how systems like this worked. Calling her was harder than I expected. Saying the words out loud, even to someone I trusted, made the situation feel more real. But once I began, I did not stop. I told her everything, from the pills to the documents, from the conversations to the notebook. She did not interrupt. She simply listened. When I finished, there was a long pause. She told me, carefully, that what I was describing could be considered elder abuse. Not just manipulation, but something with legal consequences. Hearing that term attached to my own life felt surreal, but it also gave shape to what I was facing. She told me I needed evidence, not suspicions, not assumptions, evidence. Before we ended the conversation, she suggested something simple but powerful: record them. That evening, when I returned home, the idea stayed with me. It felt wrong in a way I could not ignore. Recording my own son, listening instead of trusting. But the truth was already broken. All I was doing now was uncovering it. I found a small recorder the next day and kept it with me, hidden but ready. The first time I used it, my hands felt unsteady. I activated it quietly and left it near enough to capture voices without drawing attention. Then I waited. It did not take long. From the next room, I heard Daniel and Olivia speaking in low tones. Their words were clear enough. They talked about needing more examples, more incidents to strengthen their case. They spoke about timing, about making sure everything aligned before moving forward. I sat still, listening, saying nothing. In that moment, something inside me settled completely. They believed I was fading. What they did not know was that I was finally seeing everything clearly. If you're still watching and realize this is no longer just suspicion but something much bigger, comment number 6 below so I know you're ready. Now let's move into chapter 7, where the truth begins to come out. In the days that followed, my life settled into a strange kind of routine. Outwardly, nothing had changed. I still moved through the house with measured uncertainty, still allowed small mistakes to surface, still played the role Daniel and Olivia expected. But beneath that surface, everything was different. I was no longer reacting. I was preparing. Each evening, I continued recording what I could. Their conversations became clearer as their confidence grew. They spoke about timelines, about needing just a little more documentation, about making sure everything aligned before taking the next step. They believed they were close to something final. I listened without interruption, storing every word, every detail. Fear, which had once defined my thoughts, slowly disappeared. In its place came something steadier. Control. The moment everything shifted arrived on a quiet afternoon. A certified letter was delivered to the house, placed carefully in my hands by a uniformed courier. The envelope was thick, official, stamped with markings that made its purpose clear before I even opened it. For a moment, I simply held it, feeling the weight of what it represented. Then I broke the seal. Inside were several pages of formal documents. Legal language filled every line, precise and detached. My name appeared again and again, followed by statements that described me in ways that felt both distant and disturbingly familiar. Cognitive decline, memory impairment, inability to manage personal and financial affairs. Daniel had filed a petition for guardianship. Attached to the filing were examples, specific moments written in detail, questions I had repeated, tasks I had forgotten, incidents carefully selected and presented as proof, each one traced back to something I had either experienced under the influence of those pills or deliberately staged as part of my act. Reading it felt surreal, like watching someone else's life being rewritten. I did not cry. I did not panic. Instead, I folded the documents carefully and placed them back into the envelope. Then I reached for my phone and called Rachel. Within hours, I was sitting across from her and a senior attorney in a quiet office. The contrast between the calm room and the storm that had led me there was almost disorienting. I handed them the documents, along with the recordings I had gathered. They reviewed everything with focused attention, occasionally exchanging looks that confirmed what I already suspected. The attorney explained the process clearly. The burden of proof would be on Daniel. He would have to convince the court that I was incapable of managing my life. And if we could demonstrate intent, if we could show that the decline had been manufactured, the entire case could collapse. For the first time since the letter arrived, I felt something close to certainty. The days leading up to the hearing passed slowly. At home, nothing changed. Daniel remained calm, even confident. Olivia continued writing in her notebook, documenting behaviors she believed would strengthen their case. Neither of them knew what I had already prepared. When the day finally came, the courtroom felt colder than I expected. Formal, controlled, unforgiving. Daniel sat at one table with his lawyer, composed and ready. I sat across from him with Rachel and the attorney beside me. When his lawyer began speaking, Daniel became exactly who he needed to be: a concerned son, careful, measured, convincing. He spoke about my well-being, about his fear for my safety, about his desire to protect me. I listened without reacting. Then it was our turn. The attorney beside me placed a small device on the table and pressed play. The sound of Daniel's voice filling the courtroom did something no argument ever could. It removed doubt. It replaced speculation with certainty. When the recording ended, silence followed, the kind that settles deeply and refuses to move. I did not look at him immediately. I did not need to. I could feel the shift across the room. The quiet confidence that had surrounded him earlier was gone, replaced by something unstable. When I finally turned my head, I saw it clearly. His composure had fractured. Olivia sat beside him, her posture rigid, her eyes fixed on the table in front of her. The judge spoke, her voice calm but sharper now. She asked Daniel to explain what the recording revealed. For a brief moment, he hesitated. Then he attempted to recover, describing the conversation as misunderstood, suggesting that the words had been taken out of context. His lawyer supported that claim quickly, questioning the validity of the recording and its interpretation. But the tone of the room had already changed. My attorney responded without urgency, placing additional documents in front of the judge. The identification of the medication was clear and precise. The pills were not supplements. They were prescription sedatives, strong enough to impair memory, to slow cognition, to create exactly the symptoms Daniel had described in his petition. The judge asked a simple question. Had he given me that medication without my knowledge? Daniel did not answer immediately. The pause stretched just long enough to reveal more than any statement could. Olivia leaned forward then, speaking quickly, trying to reframe what had happened as care rather than control. But even her voice lacked the certainty it once held. My attorney continued, calmly outlining the pattern: the medication, the recorded conversations, the written documentation, each piece aligned with the next, forming a structure that no longer supported Daniel's case, but dismantled it. Then another recording was played. This one was shorter, more direct. Daniel's voice again, speaking about needing more examples, about strengthening the case, about making sure everything appeared consistent. There was no room left for interpretation. The courtroom remained silent, but the silence had changed. It was no longer uncertain. It was conclusive. When the judge finally spoke again, her decision was clear. The petition for guardianship was denied. She stated that the evidence raised serious concerns about the intent behind the filing and the actions taken leading up to it. She ordered that the matter be referred for further investigation. Just like that, everything Daniel had been building collapsed. The hearing ended shortly after. Papers were gathered, voices resumed, people moved through the room as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. But for me, the moment did not feel like a victory. It felt like something had been uncovered that could never be hidden again. In the hallway outside, Daniel approached me. He looked different, not like the man who had stood in the courtroom with confidence, but someone uncertain, searching for something that was no longer available to him. He spoke quietly, offering explanations that circled around financial pressure, around mistakes, around intentions that he claimed had never been meant to cause harm. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. There was nothing left to debate. Forgiveness, I realized, was not the same as trust. And trust, once broken this completely, does not return. I told him he would need to leave. He did not argue. He simply stood there for a moment, then turned and walked away with Olivia beside him. The legal battle had ended. What remained was something far more permanent. If you're still here, and feeling the weight of everything that just unfolded, comment number 8 below to stay with me. Now let's move toward the final outcome and what comes after it all. The house became quiet again 2 days after the hearing. Daniel and Olivia packed quickly, moving through the rooms with a kind of efficiency that left no space for conversation. There were no long discussions, no attempts to repair what had been broken. The distance between us had already grown too wide for that. Boxes were filled, doors opened and closed, and within hours, the life they had built inside my home disappeared as if it had never truly belonged there. When the front door finally closed behind them for the last time, the silence that followed felt different from the silence I had known before. It was not heavy or suffocating. It was clear. I walked through the house slowly over the next few days, allowing myself to see it again without their presence shaping my thoughts. Every room carried memories. Some were warm, tied to years I would never regret. Others felt sharper now, marked by what had happened. The kitchen where we once shared quiet meals. The hallway where Daniel had run as a child. The living room where I had once believed I was safe. I realized then that the house no longer belonged entirely to the past I cherished. It also held the truth I could not ignore. Staying there would mean living with both. For a few days, I considered keeping it anyway. It had been my home for most of my life. Letting it go felt, at first, like losing something permanent. But the more I thought about it, the more I understood that what I needed was not familiarity. It was distance. I decided to sell. The process moved quickly. The Charleston market was strong, and interest in the property came almost immediately. When the offers arrived, I reviewed them carefully, this time with complete control over every decision. There was no one watching me, no one guiding my choices, no one shaping the outcome for their own benefit. When the sale was finalized, I did not feel sadness in the way I expected. What I felt instead was something quieter, a sense that a chapter had closed exactly when it needed to. I chose to move to Savannah, Georgia. It was not entirely unfamiliar. I had visited once years ago, drawn to its slower pace and coastal air. It felt similar enough to what I had known, but different enough to allow something new to begin. My new home was smaller, simpler, easier to manage. It did not carry decades of memory, and because of that, it felt lighter. In Savannah, I rebuilt my routine from the ground up. Mornings began with walks along quiet streets lined with old trees. I spent my afternoons reading, organizing my finances, making decisions without hesitation. The independence I had once taken for granted returned gradually, but this time, I understood its value in a way I never had before. The emotional healing came more slowly. Some days were easier than others. There were moments when I thought about Daniel, not as the man he had become, but as the child I had raised. Those memories did not disappear, but they no longer controlled me. With time, something else began to take shape. Working with Rachel and her colleagues, I became involved in helping others who faced situations similar to mine. People who had been manipulated, overlooked, or quietly pushed toward losing control of their lives. What had once been my fear became something I could recognize in others. Helping them gave my experience meaning. I had lost something I could never fully replace, but I had also gained something I would never lose again: my sense of control. Several months have passed since I left Charleston, and life in Savannah has settled into something steady and clear. The days no longer feel heavy. They move with a quiet rhythm that I have come to appreciate in ways I never did before. I wake each morning knowing exactly where I stand, not just in my surroundings, but within myself. There are moments when I think back to everything that happened, not with the same sharp pain, but with a kind of distance that allows me to see it for what it truly was. I trust it without question, I believed that love alone was enough to guarantee honesty. I no longer see the world that way. Trust, I have learned, is not something that should exist without awareness. It is not about doubting everyone around you, but about understanding that even the closest relationships require boundaries. Without them, trust becomes something that can be used against you. What happened to me is not as rare as I once believed. Through the work I have begun doing, I have met others who have faced similar situations. Different details, different faces, but the same pattern. Quiet manipulation, gradual control, and a slow erosion of independence that often goes unnoticed until it is too late. A few weeks ago, I received a letter from Daniel. I recognized his handwriting immediately. I read it once, then again. The words were filled with regret, with explanations that tried to make sense of what he had done. He did not ask for forgiveness directly, but it was there between the lines. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. I did not respond, not because I feel anger and not because I cannot forgive, but because forgiveness does not mean returning to what was. Some distance exists for a reason, and I have learned to respect them. Now, when I stand by the water in the evenings, watching the tide move in and out, I feel something that once seemed out of reach. Peace. Not the kind that comes from forgetting, but the kind that comes from understanding. My life is still mine, and this time, I intend to keep it that way. In life, the deepest lessons rarely arrive in comfort. They come quietly, often disguised as trust, as love, as certainty. And when they unfold, they leave behind a clarity that cannot be unlearned. True strength is not found in never being hurt, but in recognizing the moment when something must change and having the courage to act on it. Boundaries are not walls that divide us from others, but foundations that protect who we are. No matter the stage of life, the right to choose, to think clearly, and to stand in one's own truth remains. If this story resonated with you, thank you for taking the time to listen. Your thoughts matter, so feel free to share them in the comments. And if you would like to hear more stories like this, consider following and subscribing so you do not miss what comes next.